You wouldn't have found his name in Patton's after-action report. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't quoted in the newspapers that would later run photographs of what his unit found that week in Thuringia. He was a soldier in the 734th Field Artillery Battalion, 3rd Army, and on the morning of April 17, 1945, he was told there was a sign a few kilometers off the road pointing toward a place called Ohrdruf. He didn't know yet what the sign meant. Nobody in the battery did. The night before had been ordinary in the way that war becomes ordinary. German planes had come low over the town, strafing, and he'd hit the floor the way you learn to, fast, without thinking. That was the kind of thing a soldier wrote down in a field diary, the near misses, the small terrors that became routine. He carried that diary the way a lot of men did, a place to put down what the day had cost him, in case there was no one left to tell later. He had no way of knowing that the next day's entry would be the one that outlived him. The road to Ohrdruf was 15 kilometers, and somewhere along it the war stopped being about the enemy in front of them and became about something the Army had no real name for yet. A concentration camp. 3rd Army units had reached it days earlier, the 4th Armored Division first, then the 89th Infantry, and by the time this soldier's battery arrived, the worst of it had already been, in his own words, pretty well cleaned up. That phrase would sit strangely with him. Cleaned up, as if what remained wasn't already more than enough. It was. There was no manual for what he was about to see. No training exercise had prepared an artillery battalion for the geography of a place built for the purpose of not letting people leave alive. The rules he understood, the rules of combat, of orders, of who shoots and who doesn't, didn't apply here. There was nothing to shoot. There was no line to hold. There was only walking, slowly, through what had been left behind, and trying to understand it with the only tools he had, his eyes, and whatever words might later be enough to describe it. An MP captain was standing with a man who had been a prisoner there, Polish, fluent enough in German to be understood, translated sentence by sentence for the Americans gathered around him. The soldier watched this man point out the places where beatings happened, where prisoners were tortured, where they were killed. He watched the man's face while he spoke. He wrote, later, that tears seemed to rise in the man's eyes, and that the man fought them back down. Whether out of pride or exhaustion, or the simple fact that there was still an audience to speak to, the soldier didn't guess. He only recorded it. That was the discipline of the diary, not to explain, only to witness. This is where the real decision of that day sat. Though it wouldn't have looked like a decision at the time. It looked like standing still. It looked like listening to a stranger describe atrocity through a translator in a language that wasn't your own, in a place that didn't feel like it belonged to the same century you'd grown up in. But underneath the stillness was a choice every one of those soldiers was making, whether they knew it or not, to look, fully, at what was in front of them, or to let the mind do what minds do in the presence of the unbearable. Flinch, generalize, retreat into the safety of not really seeing. Patton had made his own decision about that days earlier. He wanted as many of his men as could be spared to walk through the camp themselves. Not read a report, not hear it secondhand. See it, know that it was real, and not a rumor, and not propaganda dressed up to stir hatred of the enemy. He understood something about memory and denial that would prove prophetic. That without enough witnesses, someone someday would claim it never happened at all. So he sent them through, battery by battery, to stand where the soldier now stood, listening to a Polish survivor point at the ground. The soldier's diary entry for that day doesn't read like a man performing horror for an audience. It reads like a man trying, sentence by sentence, to hold on to his own sanity while describing something with no precedent in his own life. He reached for history to make sense of it, atrocities he compared to the savagery of ancient Rome, as if the modern world had simply reinvented an old cruelty with better uniforms. He wrote that he didn't know how one man could treat another this way, and admitted plainly that the question might not have an answer. He prayed, not eloquently, not for a sermon, just a soldier's private hope scrawled in a field notebook, that the men responsible would receive what they deserved, in this life or beyond it. Then he closed the entry with a sentence that would end up meaning more than he could have known at the time, that it was real. All of it. Grotesquely, undeniably real. That should have been the end of